All right. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Q.A.C. Team Podcast. I'm here with Dr. Melissa Robinson-Winemiller. Dr. Robinson, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing fantastic, Charles. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for joining me this afternoon.
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I enjoy your show. I've listened to a bunch of them now, and just I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So let's go ahead and get started and tell our audience a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
You bet. So I am a former musician that fell into empathy and EQ through a series of misevents with the leadership that I had. And what I do now is I am a speaker and an author and a coach and trainer specifically for empathy via EQ, which is something I really think modern leadership needs.
I love, love, love this topic because it's part of what I do as well. When you talk about empathy, oh, it hits you right there in the heart.
Absolutely, just like it
Yeah.
should, right?
And it should be important through all businesses, no matter how small or how large. This should be something that should be taught, and you know, someone like you who's go in and actually speak about this very topic.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree wholeheartly. Thank you. I mean, the more we have on the team, the better, right?
Oh, absolutely. Right. So tell us a little bit about why did you decide to be a business owner? What drove you to what you're doing today?
You know, I actually feel I was more led to do it. I was a musician for a long time and I was perfectly happy doing it. But just leader after bad leader after, horrible situation, pretty soon I had to get out of it altogether. And that's a shame because that's something I had wanted to do since I was very young. And it was like, okay, so what is this that keeps happening? What causes this? And what could I do about it rather than, fold up and crawl under my desk and stay there? What could I do to keep other people from getting as mangled as I had been? And I started studying and I went back and got a doctorate so I could really dig in and study it. My dissertation's going to be on empathy and leadership, specifically for interdisciplinary leadership, because I want to figure out why this is happening and what we can do to keep it from happening.
Yeah. It's such an interesting topic, right? Because a lot of people don't understand what empathy is. We tend to get caught up in that sympathy role versus empathy. And a lot of people don't understand the difference between the two.
Yeah.
And that's huge, right? Because once you start explaining, how empathy works and how sympathy is, one, they're both good, but one really is different from the other.
Very,
Yeah.
very. And in fact, sympathy can get really negative reactions. It's something that they train healthcare professionals, stay away from this because the second you're showing sympathy, you're showing judgment. And empathy and judgment can't exist in the same room.
And that's so true. Let's talk a little bit about that because it's such a great topic.
Yeah.
Empathy, it's such an important role. If you don't have empathy, for example, somebody is calling and complaining to you and you're not listening, you're not engaging in that topic of what's happening, they're going to walk all over you and you're not going to resolve that issue.
Yeah.
And specifically face to face, that can really be a challenge,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And it can because especially if you're in a leadership position, you can end up with what they call empathy fatigue because you're trying to have empathy and you're trying to lead well and you're trying to connect with people. And sometimes after a while, you just run out of gas, which is why it's even more important to know what it is so you understand how to strategically use it, when to put up boundaries, how to actually be effective with it.
Yeah. I actually, in my 16-year span of corporate America,
Yeah.
I actually was faced with one of these challenges from my reps who specifically said, I'm not saying I'm sorry to a customer. I don't care about their problems. I don't care. I challenged that employee and said, well, you're going to come up with ways in our next session of how they're going to tell me how you're going to say you're sorry without saying you're sorry. And it worked. He had a
Excellent.
list of things that worked. And I thought it was brilliant. It's like, it worked,
Yeah.
you know?
And it is tricky. I mean, that's a really tricky line to walk. When
Yeah.
I work with leadership, I tell them, having empathy, number one, it doesn't mean you're taking responsibility for whatever's going on, because you're not. And you're also not necessarily trying to fix it. You're understanding what's happening. And it doesn't mean you don't put up boundaries. I
Yeah.
mean, we all have a point where we have to be able to separate ourselves out from the situation. But that's a lot different than just not having it at all. I mean, or,
Yeah.
throwing your hands up and saying, I don't care.
Right. Also too, right? It's really huge on it's not specifically what you say, it's how you say it.
A lot
Because
of
if
it.
we're not careful of how we say, no, we can't do that, if you just come out and say, no, I can't do that, that's going to drive some unwanted behavior.
It can. See, but then
Yeah.
again, I think that's exactly where empathy's at. Because if I'm talking to someone and I know that for this person, clarity is kindness, then to just be able to say, yeah, there's really nothing I can do about this. I can't do this.
Yeah.
Then for that person, that's correct. Whereas someone else, they might want to know why and they want reasons and they're more of an analytical thinker. So again, being able to make that human to human connection makes all the difference.
And wearing multiple hats for multiple people, right?
Yep. Got it. Adaptive leadership. It's important.
Adaptive leadership. It's huge. It really
Yeah.
is, because if people don't, and I think it's what makes a good leader, is being able to put those different hats on and being able to coach, train, mentor, and develop everybody who is different, and it could be a challenge in today's society.
Yes, it
You know?
absolutely can, but it pays huge dividends.
Yeah.
There's a book by Scott Page called The Diversity Dividend. So, I mean, the idea of being able to relate to each of these different people and pull more out of them, both singularly and as a team, than they could by themselves, exactly like you said, by being able to adapt and understand exactly the people that are involved.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, so you you kind of shifted gears and from musician now to this. Let's talk a little bit about that. So why did you choose this industry? Let's get a little bit into what drove you to this.
At first, I didn't know what I was going to do at all. When I got out of music, I was just kind of lost and I was just paying attention and thinking and going, well, I don't understand what happened. I don't understand how these people acted this way. Because what I found
Yeah.
after what had happened, um, the people that I would try and talk to, it's not that they were bad people. In fact, just the opposite. They were really decent people, but they just could not connect. They just didn't have empathy for some of what was going on within the institution. And then I went from that into corporate healthcare, and it was the same thing. And I went from that into some consulting with my husband, and it was the same thing. And it was like, there's a pattern that's happening here. What is going on? And that's when I started trying to work it out on my own and just go, what is it? What is happening? Because it's not a one-off. And it's in different areas of the country, and it's different industries, and it's different people, and where is this disconnect? And that's when I decided I was going to go back and you know finish some degrees and get an MBA and then go on and get the second doctorate and give myself that time to study and dig in and figure it out. And just the more I was studying and the more I was looking at this, the more it was this emotional intelligence thing is where things are getting disconnected. But why? So the thing is with the emotional intelligence, it's something we've been talking about since 1989, but people have always lumped empathy in that emotional intelligence basket because it's kind of like a basket filled with, communication and motivation and teamwork and self-motivation and all these things. But I really think that empathy has to come first. I actually think it's a precursor, and that's different from what they've done in the past. So through whatever studying and I've been doing case studies and I just personal experience and all of this, I really think we need to start with the empathy, and then the emotional intelligence clicks into place, and the people that I've worked with and the stuff that I've done backs this up. I think that's where we're missing the boat.
I agree. I think that's important. Empathy, emotional intelligence, working with their peers, and really focus on higher level. That way they understand how to reach those lower level employees and really work with them, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's go ahead and talk about some of the challenges that you were faced with getting this created and getting started with this.
Yeah. I think the biggest one I'm facing is just that what I'm doing is brand new. I mean, even though we've been talking about emotional intelligence, I can't find anyone else that talks about using empathy as a precursor. And I don't see anybody else that talks about it in that way and making it actionable. So
Yeah.
I talk about it being like a treadmill, right? Because you can be that person that has the treadmill sitting in the bedroom and you're hanging clothes on it and the cat's sleeping on it. And that's great. You've got it. But if you're not using it, you're not getting the best outcomes from it that you can. And empathy and emotional intelligence are exactly the same. Most people statistically have it, but if they don't use it and they, use it actionably, then what good is it doing?
What good is it, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Challenges, challenges, challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I'm
Yeah.
having to kind of educate as I go because this is something brand new. And even some people in the field, I mean, people that I've talked to, they're kind of like, well, that's not what the research says. That's not what we've learned. That's not how this has gone for the next 34 years or the last 34 years. And it's like, yeah, but we haven't been able to make it work. So
Yeah.
something isn't working. So maybe we need to readdress how we're looking at this.
Yeah. And the only thing constant is change. And if we don't utilize and make change, it's not going to work. We have to
Yes.
do something different, right? What we've been doing is not working going forward. What are we going to do different, right?
Exactly. Especially
Yeah.
because change is speeding up.
Yeah. 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 Let's talk about that a little bit because, my first business around was called Constant Change Consulting. And, again, the only thing constant was change. Let me help you measure that change and manage that change. That's what my whole business was around. And I
Yeah.
think it's really interesting that we kind of on the same page here where, we're going 15 years later, almost 20 years later. And here we are, we're talking about the same thing about change and how do we get this intelligence and get this thing going, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm with you 110% because I'm in change management. So same idea, this
Yeah.
this change is the only constant in the world. And we just keep like layering it on, whether it's the generational friction, the workplace has changed, or all the technology, or the addition of AI, or remote work, or, the change, it keeps coming and it just keeps coming faster because it's compounding on itself. So
Yeah.
I'm with you. It's constant and it's fast. And if we can't adapt and move with it, I mean, we're lost before we begin.
Yeah. And I would love to hear your take and your part on this, the newer generations, these millennials and Gen Zs that were facing with these challenges of the quiet quitting and just the fact that if something is said and done improperly, they quit, they don't want to work, they they don't want to work. So tell us a little bit about your side of this. How do you feel? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah. No, that's a fantastic. I mean, it's a huge thing in the workforce right now. And
Uh,
the thing is when this was first defined, I mean, we've always had the, between this years of this generation and these years is this generation. But when they really started to define millennial and Gen Z and Gen Alpha, they actually looked at people and their relationship with technology. So with the baby boomers, they were around when the computer was first invented and would fill an entire office building. So they're a little slower to adapt because they're used to that kind of pace. Gen X, which is me, and I'm assuming probably you
Gen
too.
X.
Yep, right here. I mean, we were there when they started bringing computers into the workforce, and we were expected to be a little more adaptive, but we still had privacy. We still had an expectation of, work stopped here because I don't have a computer at home because I can't afford it, that sort of thing. Whereas the millennials were the first ones that had the internet at their fingertips, and Gen Z have never known life without the iPhone. So I think when you start looking at these different generations in terms of what their experience is and their relationship with technology, some of this makes a lot more sense because I know that every one of us gets slandered a little bit, right? Well, the boomers are the old fogies and they can't handle anything. And the millennials, it's all them with their avocado toast. And I mean, all of the memes and the stereotypes and everything.
Yeah,
But on the other hand, if you look at these generations, watching the other generations around them and going, well, I don't want to be like that. I don't want to give my entire life to one company only to get laid off 5 years before retirement. I don't want to have no work-life balance because I have this technology in my face 24/7.
for
So
seven.
I think there's a certain amount of empathy that needs to happen here generationally with these major groups to be able to say, you know, your relationship with technology is a lot different than mine. Can you explain it to me so I can understand this better and we
Yeah.
can get on better because you've got skills that I just don't, and vice versa.
Communication, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's key because if you listen to each of these You take one person from each generation, boomer, X, millennial, Z, right? You take all of
Yeah.
those, put them in one room, and you listen to each one of them and how they speak and how they talk, and their views are 100% totally different. Boomer and X might be close, but millennial, way off. Gen Z, way off. You agree?
Yeah. Well, not necessarily. I don't, because at the end of the day, I think we're all just human beings trying to be human.
Yeah.
So like the millennials I've worked with, they really just want to be a part of something. They want to be involved in something, and they want to know that what they're doing is going to equate to something more than just a paycheck. And
Yeah.
because of this, now that I understand better who they are and what they're doing, I can say, okay, well, let's talk about how I can help motivate you at this job. What can we do so that this is more than just a paycheck for you? You're not necessarily motivated by money. You're not necessarily motivated by moving up the scale. What is it that does motivate you? What is it that we can do so that you do feel that you're a part of something bigger? And like the Gen Zs, they have seen, people getting kind of maligned by bigger corporations and willing to kind of sacrifice their lives to be able to make a paycheck and then having been thrown away. And they're just not willing to settle for that anymore, you know?
You beat me to it. That is something I want to mention, is that I think Gen Z is the first generation who have said, we had enough. We're not going to follow what everybody else is doing. We are going to make it the way we want to make it, and that's how it's going to be. And I love that about
Absolutely.
them, right? Because they're standing up for something that they believe in. As long as, now, on my part, as long as that belief is in line with the business owner or the corporation or whoever the business is of what they're trying to accomplish, I'm on board, right? You got
Yeah.
to make sure that what you're asking is within the realm of what can happen with the business owner, right?
Yes.
I talked to a Gen Z one time, and this is no joke. What they said to me was, "Well, I don't know why the business owner just can't listen to what we want and then just change their business to around what we want."
Well, but on the
Well,
other hand, has anyone ever explained it to them and said, this is why, this is what's happening? And they just can't do it for these reasons. That's part of it too, is that we were kind of brought up into understanding what this stuff entailed, how to get a job, how to be part of the workforce, what was expected of us. Some of these younger generations are missing that piece.
I'm
And
glad you
that's,
said that, because that's part of what my mission is. I have a little presentation I put together to where I want to get in front of people who, middle schoolers about to start work, maybe had their first job a little bit or getting into it, teach them about the customer experience, teach them what they're going to face when they do an interview, when they get their first job, what it's going to be like when you have that angry person face to face with you. How do you deal with it? Because what I'm seeing is these kids are not trained, and then the first time somebody comes in because that burger is not the way they want, they get screamed at, they don't know how to react and they quit. They say, I
yes,
can't do this. And they leave. So
right.
my goal is I want to help fix that.
Exactly. And I think personally, I think it's kind of unfair to have those expectations of them. I mean, you can't know what you don't know. And okay, in the past, we assumed that they would be able to just come in fully formed, and we mostly did. But
Yeah,
on the other hand, this is an opportunity for everybody because we all get to learn together and they get to be trained up as we need them to be and as they can be. So,
yeah.
I think there's a definite bright side to this.
Oh, absolutely. I'm 100% agreeing with you. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
listening, right? Listening to these individuals of what goals are needing to be accomplished versus what their expectations are. If we can meet somewhere in the middle, we can make it work, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, what are some of the expectations for you and your business in the next year or two?
Well, I have a book coming out the end of September, so I'm really excited about that because that will be my first one. And I'd like to do a kind of a series of them talking about empathy and EQ in corporate life, in healthcare, in society, this kind of thing. But you got to start with one, and this is number one. So I'm pretty happy about that.
That's exciting.
And yeah, and I'm
Yeah.
starting to get some speaking. I just came back from speaking at Cambridge University in the UK, which proves that this is an international thing. People want to know about it, and that's really exciting. So I'm
Yeah.
doing more speaking and getting around, and pretty soon I'm hoping to be able to snowball that, and I'm continuing on with my coaching and training. And biggest thing right now is just for me to get the word out as wide and far as possible.
Yeah. I like that idea you're talking about, how you want to do a series of these books, because as you and I'm sure we're on the same page, there's no cookie cutter approach to how you do this on every industry, because it's all going to be different,
Yes,
right?
exactly. Exactly. And like within healthcare, there's totally different meanings when you talk about empathy. They immediately think of, patient-facing practitioners. And it's like, no, you need it with your leadership too. We need to discuss there's different ways to employ this.
And if you're like me, when you're talking healthcare, the first thing you think of is sympathy, not empathy, because somebody's coming to you with a problem,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And that's important to distinguish between the two. Again, we talked about that, sympathy versus empathy, and you
Yeah.
have to really be careful of how you do this.
Yeah, you do. And it is a skill. I actually say, this is a skill. This is a learned talent. Even though most people have a certain amount, it's like Michael Jordan, right? The first time that he actually went up for his high school team, he didn't make the varsity team. He had talent, but he had to work on the skill. It's the same thing. You're going to have a certain amount of innate talent, but you've got to work on that skill. And it isn't a leadership in 4 easy steps kind of thing. It's something you have to work on, and you can't
Yeah,
delegate it.
yeah. So when's this book coming out?
End of September. And the
Okay,
title is The Empathic Leader: How EQ via Empathy Transforms Leadership for Better Profit, Productivity, and Innovation.
that's great. Cannot wait to get my hands on this one.
Oh, I'm so excited. I'm so happy. This has
Yeah,
been such a labor of love, and you know, it's a big
yeah,
deal.
absolutely. Yeah, I 100% agree with you. Yeah. So, Dr. Weinmiller, how do we contact you? How do we get in touch with you?
If you go to my website, which is VIA empathy.com, it has all of my contact information, as well as a quiz that people can take for seeing where their empathy spectrum lies. And there is a video that will go out by email for the top 5 traits that leaders can use now for EQ and
Oh,
empathy. So it's
nice.
EQ via empathy. And I shortened it like that because it's just a lot easier than saying EQ through the lens of empathy.
Well, thank you for that wisdom, because that would have been a mouthful to try to put into a browser.
We don't need any more long web names.
That's why I went to school. So you don't need those long web names, right?
Exactly. Hey, if it works, I'll take it.
Exactly, right. Oh, man. So, one thing to leave with our audience today, one
Yeah.
thought. What is that?
If there is a single way that you can actually start employing empathy right now, start with yourself.
Yeah.
Start with self-reflection. Are you actually showing empathy to yourself? Because one thing I see with a lot of these leaders is they're very driven, they're very ambitious, they're very motivated. And because of that, they don't give themselves the empathy they need. Well, if you can't show it for yourself, how are you going to show it for anyone else?
Such good wisdom.
It's a simple thing, but it's funny how much I run into it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well,
You
I
know?
thank you again for coming on the podcast and interviewing. It's been a pleasure. I know we had a little bit of technical difficulty. We're working through it.
Hey, it's all good. And, that's part of the change is ever happening. You got to adapt and stay with it and, roll with the punches a little bit.
You got it. Again, thank you so much for coming on, Dr. Weinmiller. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks again. This has been a pleasure. It's very,
Thank
very
you.
enlightening.
Pleasure's all mine. This is fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your wisdom. And I cannot wait to read your book. And to our listeners, please start at the website. Go check it out and see what she's about, right?
That would be fantastic. The more the merrier, right?
Absolutely, right? Have a
Yeah.
great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks. You too.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Q.A.C. Team podcast with your host, Charles Luttrell. Connect with us on the web at QACteam.com, TikTok at QAC Team, Facebook and Instagram at QAC.team. Thanks for your support.